Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we have a replay of one of my favorite patterns, but we're doing it in a new colorway, my fabric collection, Nocturne with QT Fabrics. So we saw a customer shared a quilt that they created using Nocturne to create Congruence. It's in my book, Fat Quarter Workshop, and we originally did this in some Anna Maria Horner, and it's a great no neutral quilt. So what you're going to do is you're going to split your fabrics into different colorways. What we did is we put all of our grays together, we put all of our teals and dark teals and blues together, and then we have our light teals and citrons together, and it really is a lot of fun because you are able to just see the color contrast, and it really goes very fast. When we put this together, you're going to sew 2 equilateral triangles together, then you're going to join the top to have a row here, and then you're going to add this to the side, and that's that triangle, and that's going to piece next to a large triangle, so there's no seams to match. And when you put it together, it goes in horizontal rows. So this is a great introduction if you have been wanting to try 60-degree triangles, but they look a little intimidating. This is a good one to give a go because there's no Y seams, it goes together fairly quickly, and it works great with no neutral. We didn't use any of the background fabrics in this. We also didn't fussy cut anything. You can see the owls just kind of ended up wherever, and it looks cool. It just is like a mishmash of color, and these colors are really on trend right now in home decor, so this would be really pretty. I'm excited to have this in our home. We also have some great tips in the tutorial on using the 2-pinning technique to make sure that your points come together exactly as they should when you're joining your rows. And we had one of our team members did this one, and she had done another 60-degree one for us, and I had her watch the video in between, and let me tell you, the points went from being close to absolutely perfect. So it really makes a difference when you use that 2-pinning technique. So check that out. Make sure you watch that all the way through. So the original fabric we no longer have, but we did put together kits with this because we loved how it turned out when our customers share their image with them. And then we're also going to follow up with this video with another one in a couple of days that shows you how I quilted this. I just used wavy lines, but I made the waves sort of go in the direction of the diamond. So that way I was able to go real easy. It didn't take a lot of time. I got it done in about half a day on the long arm, but it really elevates the quilting and is a lot of fun. So make sure you stay tuned, like and subscribe, do all the things so that way you don't miss that video. All right, well, don't forget you can get Congruence in my book, Back Quarter Workshop, and you can get the kit for this using Nocturne over on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Now we're going to replay our original tutorial, and you're going to get to take a peek at that and learn all the techniques to be able to create this fabulous quilt at home. All right, enjoy the replay. So all of your cutting instructions and your yardage requirements and how many fat quarters you need are available in the pattern to go with this. But here's the one thing I want to make sure I show you on camera. Because we are doing these from fat quarters, we need to be able to have opposite half equilateral triangles for the edges of the quilt. That'll make sense when you're looking at your pattern and when I show you how we're putting it together at the end. But for now, just trust me and know that when you are cutting your large triangles only, this does not apply when you're cutting the small ones, but when you're cutting the large triangles, you want to layer it so that you have one where the wrong side is facing up, and then the second one, cut them as a pair so the wrong side is facing down. That way you have the wrong sides together, and that way you're going to have opposites. I'll show you what I mean right here. So we're going to take, I like to use a Clearview triangle ruler. I use the 8-inch one. I find it works for all the patterns that I do. So if you are a fan of our patterns and you want to give equilateral triangles a go, you're going to be able to use this ruler many times as you are working on our patterns. They are nowhere near as hard as they seem in terms of triangle quilts, and we'll see how easy it is if we go through it. But this is definitely one to get. You'll use it again and again. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come pretty close to the edge, but I want to be able to leave a little bit hanging off here so that I can get a 1/4-inch seam, because we're going to use that to get a nice straight edge on the side of our quilt. So first what I'm going to do is I'm lining up my measurement with the bottom, so I've got a nice straight line going across the bottom here, and then I also have my point even with the top of my strip. I'm going to cut up, and then I'm going to cut down as well. If this is weird for you to cut doing going down the side, you could always cut this part first and then flip everything around. But I've done this a ton of times, so I'm just used to it. All right, so now I've cut 2 of these, one from one fabric and one from the other. Now I'm going to show you what I mean with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut it so that it ends up being a half equilateral triangle. So now I need to cut this so that there's a 1/4 inch going beyond where the tip of the triangle is. So that way that's in our seam allowance and in our binding when we finish off the edges of this quilt. So for this part, I'm going to take a regular ruler and I'm going to line it up so that the 1/4 inch is nice and even with the tip of this triangle here. And then I've got some nice hash marks even with the bottom, so that way I know it's nice and straight. Then I'm going to just go ahead and cut right up the side. And now if you look at these side by side, we'll put the other one up so you can kind of see the difference. Move this out of the way. So now you can see that this is basically half of a triangle with that little 1/4 inch seam fitting right here. So that way when this gets sewn together, your tip is going to come right to the edge of your quilt and not get cut off by your binding. Great little extra tip. And you can see this is why we needed to have them right sides together, is that these are not facing the same way. So if these were in the same quilt going around a different equilateral triangle block, you can see that one fits nicely on the left side of the triangle and one fits nicely on the left. But if I would have arranged those to where like the same side was facing up, that wouldn't happen. I would just have 2 on one side instead of 1 to fit neatly on each side. So basically the big thing to remember is when you are getting these ready to cut, you're going to want to make sure that you've got your wrong sides together, and then everything's going to work out just fine. All right, I'm going to show you how I continue cutting down this with the equilateral triangle ruler, just in case you've never done it before. That way you can sort of see how this is done. You already saw me cut the first one. So I had cut and everything was right here. I sliced right up the top and down the side. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a 180-degree flip. And I'm going to now line up. My edge should be nice and even over here with the edge that I just cut, just like if you were doing a square. And now I've got still my nice inch line going over here. And then I've got the tip of the triangle even with the very bottom over here. And from here on out, I'm just going to cut on the right side of that triangle. Whenever I'm cutting, I like to keep my pinky on the side of the ruler, and that's no matter what shape I'm doing, I do that. That helps me hold everything in place and keep things from shifting on me. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a little pull. So now we've got another one cut. So you're just going to keep on going down the line, flipping this as you go. So I'm going to go ahead and flip it over again. Give it that 180-degree flip. Again, line it up. And except this time it's all flipped. So my inch line is now on the bottom. My point is at the top. Once I've got everything nice and in line, and give it a little slice. What you do want to make sure you don't do, and especially on the little triangles, is you want to make sure that that point is as pointy as it is on the ruler. Because if you end up having a little flat bit at the top, that screws up your triangle math, and then things aren't going to fit together as neatly as they could. So make sure you do that when you are working with this. Otherwise, you can just keep flipping things around and cutting them up. Then when you get down to the other side, we're going to cut that as a half equilateral triangle again, but leaving that 1/4 inch seam allowance in. So again, I'm lining up the 1/4 inch line on my ruler, even with the very tip of that triangle. So I've got some fabric hanging off the edge. And then I'm just making sure that my bottom edge is nice and square. I'm going to go ahead and cut that up. And now you can see again that I've got my nice tip going up to the top, plus a little 1/4 inch hanging off here. So we're going to be able to sew that together. So go ahead and cut all your big triangles and all your little triangles, and then come back and I'm going to show you next how to sew your little triangles so that they end up being the same size as this big one that we just cut. By doing it this way, you can have a quilt that goes together fairly quickly, but it still has a lot of texture and movement in it. And this is also a no neutral quilt, so that's really fun because you can really show off all the fabrics in a line and sort of show off all those different colorways in there and just have a lot of fun with it. But you don't have to worry about buying 2, 3, 4 yards of a neutral in order to make it work. You're just going to make the eye move by how you move those color values around by pairing those colors up. So we'll talk about that more as we sew it together. All right, so I've got my stack of triangles and I have them in the order of 6 that I pulled. So basically, here are my first 6 fabrics and then they continue to repeat after that. So what you're going to do is you're going to need to divide these into 4 because there's going to be 4 triangles that make this up. So what you can do really easily is you can have, let's see, we'll put 12 there. We'll put another 12 down here. And then I'm going to set the other ones off to the side. All right, so we'll use these later. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over. And I have to remember to flip it right sides together as I'm sewing. But what this is going to do is I'm always going to be pairing a different fabric with each other. And that way I can always get like a light with a dark and all of that. So I'll show you how I'm sewing these together and pairing them up. And that way you kind of get a real scrappy look without having to think too hard about it. Because I think that's where sometimes we get hung up on scrappy quilts is we think, oh, we can't have any 2 things touching. And so that's really hard to do. But it is easier than it looks if you kind of let it happen a little bit on its own without forcing it too much. So I'll show you how I do that. So I'm just using a regular 1/4 inch stitch for this. No need for a scant 1/4 inch seam. The math works out just fine and there's no need to trim anything down. So I'm just putting these right sides together. And as long as you've cut everything to the same size, there shouldn't really be any need to pin. What you can do is once you get it started, you can just line up your points on the other side and put your fingertip on top and let that come up. Now you are working with an equilateral triangle, which means there is a lot of bias going on here. So you just want to let your feed dogs take it through. You don't want to force it because that's when you're going to get stuff where it is getting stretched and out of place. So for the next one, I'm just going to flip this one over. So that way I'm going to have right sides together. And then I'm going to put them right sides together here and start sewing. Now my one tip is when you get to the point where you can no longer hold on to this tip, is I put my finger just on the side here and I let that serve as my guide to make sure that I keep maintaining that 1/4 inch stitch all the way through the point. All right, so I'm just going to keep on sewing these until I get them all together. You do the same at home and just chain stitch them all together and it'll go super fast. All right, so I have finished sewing all of my triangles together. And so now I'm going to press them open. And I do like to press seams open whenever I'm doing anything with 60-degree triangles. And more almost with any triangle I do. I feel like that makes for really, really sharp, smooth points that don't get bulky at all. So you are not limited at all in how you quilt because you've got a thick seam. And I really just like how it works. So to do that, what I do is I will open that seam up and kind of flatten it out with my 3 fingers ahead of the iron. Just make sure that your fingers are well ahead of the iron so you don't burn yourself with that. And then what I'll do is I'll flip it over and I'll give it another press from the other side. And you're gonna start to see why I like keeping all these dog ears, because we're gonna be able to use these little points to line up when we sew our next bit together. So go ahead and press the rest of your blocks open and then we're going to sew and continue putting these triangles together. All right, so we've got our diamonds together. Now we're going to sew triangles to 1/2. So I'm going to take half of what's left because remember we need to split these in quarters. And I'm laying them together, but I do not want to have the same fabrics in. So what I like to do here is go ahead and flip the top one to the bottom. And then I know that these are not going to match up at all. And if for any reason I end up pulling up one of these that ends up, it is already in here, I'm just going to put that to the side and put it on the next one where it doesn't match up. And it works out fabulously. That way you can get scrappy without having to plan out every single thing and put it on a design wall, because not everybody has space for that or the patience for it. So this is the reason why I like to keep these dog ears on and why I use that ruler that has all the points on it and not a blunt tip at the top. Is now I can line up my other triangle and just line up the point with the triangle at the top and then again at the bottom. And I don't have to pin. I can just make sure my triangles are lined up and I know it's going to work out and be good to go. So that's why I really like that Clearview triangle ruler, and I prefer it over ones that have a blunt tip. So now ideally my needle is going to come right down in the little valley where these triangles meet. So I'm going to be starting right where that little valley is, and that's where your 1/4 inch seam should be. And then the rest of it is just the same as before. All I do is I'm going to line up these points at the bottom, put my fingertip on it to hold it together, and sew along. You could always pin that if that made you feel a little bit more comfortable, but do whatever works for you. All right, now I'm just going to keep flipping these right sides together, just making sure that no two fabrics are together. Like this one is the same fabric, so when I get to the next bit, I'm just going to move that to the side and we'll sew this one and we'll put that on the next one. So go ahead and chain piece and get all these sewn to the bottom right. All right, so now it's time to press these open again, and then we're going to sew some more. Press them open the exact same way. The only thing you have to watch out for is making sure that you're not pressing this seam over when you are pressing them open. And then I usually try to lay them so that the seam we just sewed is off to the right, so that way I know that the next one that comes on needs to go right here. So go ahead and keep pressing all yours open, and then we'll come back and sew some more. All right, so now I'm going to take the remaining ones, and again, I'm going to flip it down so that what is facing up is not in any other blocks, and then I should be able to have scrappy throughout without having to worry about it. Now, here's the also real fun part of leaving those dog ears on, is now I've got a dog ear at the top and at the bottom. So when I flip this together, I'm going to have guides again on the top and bottom, because I've got a nice corner right here that's going to line up, as well as also down here. So you can just line up those points. You can pin them if you want, or you can just line them up and sew, because they're pretty small, so they're mostly going to stay where you want them to be as you're sewing. All right, so what I do is I get those first two in, and then I will line up down here. And here's a point where sometimes things might have shifted a little bit on you as you're sewing, or gotten a little smaller, or maybe you didn't cut right. So if you get to a point where you got a little bit of wave, I do in this one, all you have to do is put your finger on it and just give it a little bit of tension. And that will straighten it out. And I'm not pulling, I'm just getting it a little taut. So that way this is nice and flat instead of a little wavy. And that is the good part about the bias. Sometimes the bias can be a scary thing because you think it's going to get out of shape on you. But if you are able to just pull it a little taut so that everything is nice and flat, then you're going to have a nice flat seam when you're done, and it won't look like you eased in a bunch of fabric. So that's how you do it if everything isn't matching up just perfectly. If it's way, way off, then that's another story. But if it's just a little bit off, then you can do it that way. All right, so keep sewing these together, and then our triangle blocks will be done, and we can start putting our rows together. All right, so now you can kind of see the 4 colorways that I split this into. I kind of took the yellow, brown, rust and put those together. And then I kind of had the mauves and the deep maroons together. And then I had the greens and purples together. And then I had the deeper colors with this nice light one together as well. And I kind of split it up that way, and I really like the way it looks. It's turning out really cute. And so that way the colors will work together within the block, and then they will transition nicely from one to another as you go through. So when you're doing a no neutral quilt, you kind of have to think about that ahead of time, like what fabrics play nice together and how do I keep those together within the individual blocks and make that color flow. So when you are putting this together, you're going to refer to your layout diagram in the pattern, and I basically split these into 4 colorways. So that's what you want to do too when you are selecting your fabrics for this. And then you're going to lay it out in whatever order it says, and we're basically going to be alternating between a piece equilateral triangle and then just a regular plain equilateral triangle. I'm going to be sewing together row 2 because I've already sewn together all my row 1s, and I'm going to show you how to sew a row together and then how to join your rows as well, so you don't lose any of these fabulous points. So when I was sewing this together, I laid it out just as you see it here, where I've got it going from color 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And that way I can just kind of grab and go and I don't have to think too hard about it. So I'm going to start off here with color 2 going up because I'm putting together my second row. Then I'm going to need color 3, and I need a pieced triangle for that one. And then we're going to go to color 4. of just a regular triangle. And I could switch this up because these fabrics are the same. So if I wanted to, I could try swapping that out, and that looks pretty good. I'm going to stick with that for right now. And you can either plan out all your rows in advance, or you can kind of just grab and go for it. I'm going to show you how to put these 4 original ones together, and then that will be all you need to know to complete the rest of the row. And then I'm going to show you how to join the rows here. So let's see. Now I need 4, and that needs to be a piece triangle. So here you can see everything is alternating nicely. I don't have too many of the same colors together. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these 4 together so you can see that process. And then it just continues in the exact same process throughout the rest of the row, just it keeps getting bigger. So let's sew this together. So I'm going to take these 2 to start with. When I sew it together, you can see that all of these are coming to a point here. So I want to make sure that when I sew, I'm going to sew just to the seam side of where that point is. And it's really easy to see on the back. So what I'm going to do here is just flip this over. And you can see where all these seams are coming together right here. And so I want to sew just to the right of that, right here. And again, another great reason to press your seams open is because you can see where all that is. And as long as you're sewing just to the right of where all those seams are, where that point is, then you're never going to lose a point. So as much as you can, you want to be able to sew to where the piece triangle is on the top, because you don't have a triangle to lose on this side. But if you sew too far in, you could on this one. Now, one note, occasionally, if you haven't sewed anything or cut it just perfect, this triangle isn't going to be exactly a 1/4 inch seam. I would much rather sew just 1 needle width to the right of where all those triangles come together, and maybe have a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller seam, because you're never going to notice that because it's going to be hidden within the quilt, but you sure are going to notice if you miss a point and you cut that off when you were sewing, or have it way out in no man's land because it's too far in. So no matter what, I always kind of aim for just to the side of that, and whether it's perfect 1/4 inch seam or not, I'm always going to do that. So let's get sewing. And again, your points are going to line up perfectly here, so not too much need to pin. You certainly can if that makes you feel more comfortable. I'm just going to go ahead and skip it for this part of it. But I will pin when I sew those rows together. Don't worry, we will use them. All right, I'm coming up to that point, so I'm going to slow down a little bit, make sure I'm just to the right of where all those seams are coming together. Now for this one, it's a little different because we have this point here. So this point of your triangle should be right in line with this point of the top. And so you're going to have it hanging off just a little bit like this. So when I line this up, it's going to look like that, with that little triangle of your 1/4 inch seam hanging off past the side. That's what it's supposed to do. Again, slow down, so I'm just going just to the right of where those seams all come together. Make sure my points are lined up, and go ahead and sew down the rest. So it's the same deal as when we were pressing everything else open. You just want to kind of hold that open with your fingertips, but you do want to make sure that we're getting a lot of seams now, that we are not pressing anything going in anywhere it's not supposed to go. So do be careful when you're going across seams like that. And I usually will go from this side. And you can see now how you're going to have a nice edge to your row, so you won't have to like chop off half your block and lose your fabric. That's no fun. So that's just a real nice little feature, and it uses all those little extras at the beginning and ends of your rows as well. All right, so now you can see kind of how this goes together. I'm really happy with this join. I really haven't lost any points at all. It's looking great. Same on this side, and that seam pressed open makes everything lay really flat. So if I wanted to, I could quilt like right into that and then come out and do something really cool. And I'm just going to keep sewing it together. It's pretty much the same process from here on out, except this time you would flip it like this. So your row is going to look a little funny. as it gets bigger because they're going to be kind of going off in opposite directions, but you're still always going to line up your dog ears with your dog ears and then just sew right down the center. And if you can, always sew with that piece side up, so that way you can always sew just to the right of where all those seams are coming together so you don't lose any of those points. So I'm going to go ahead and get my second row sewn together, and then I'm going to show you how I pin the rows together so I don't lose any points, and then we are done with this quilt. So I finished my first 2 rows. You can see how the color is starting to travel down. So I've got those color families, and it's just alternating between a piece block and a solid block. So it's looking really fun, and it's going to be very busy, but the eye is going to be directed by the way that we group those color families. So it's absolutely going to work and be lovely, and I'm so excited about it. I can't wait to have this all finished. So I'm going to show you my 2 pinning method to make sure that we don't lose any of these triangle tips when we sew them together. If you've watched any of my triangle sewing videos, same way I always do it, just it's a little different because it's got the equilateral triangle point coming together. So let's watch and how to do that. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flip this right sides together, get everything nice and lined up here. Now, normally I would start at one end and work to the other. I'm just gonna go ahead and start right in the center here so you can see what I'm doing. So you can see, again, where all 3 points are coming together. I'm gonna put my pin in right where that is happening, right in the center. Then I'm going to find where all 3 points are coming together on the bottom, put a pin in there as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch that straight up and down. So what that does is it makes sure that my points are right on top of each other. And you'll notice here that that means that in all cases, sometimes these dog ears are not lined up. So even though we've been using those to keep everything lined up all along, at this point you just need to ignore it. Do not try and match up the dog ears. What you want to do is match up the points where the seams are and kind of ignore where those dog ears are because they may not be right on top of each other. Now we're going to take a second pin and I'm going to put it in sideways across that pin. And what that does is that's going to hold everything together while keeping my points right on top of each other with this pin. And the reason why I use a second pin is if I were to rock this pin in order to pin it together, what it would do is it would move the top piece forward and the bottom piece back, and my points would no longer be in alignment with each other. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat that process all the way down my row, and then I'm going to sew it together the same way I did everything else. Again, just trying to be just to the seam side, 1 needle width to the seam side where all these points come together when I'm sewing, and that will allow me to make my perfect seams without losing any points. So to get started, I'm just going to sew a couple of stitches first before I pull out that first pin. That will ensure that everything stays nice and together right where I pinned it. Now from here on out, I'm going to go ahead and sew as close to those pins as I can possibly get. Like I want to get to a point where I have crossed over where all of those points come together. And then with my needle down, then remove the pin. And that will ensure that nothing scooches out of place for you when you're sewing. I'm going to go ahead and sew the rest of this row together. Then we'll press it open and we are done. I also like to press my row seams open. I think that that really helps make for nice crisp points that are exactly where they should be. So just make sure you're working on that from the back, and then just be careful, as we have been as always, to make sure that you're not flipping any of the other seams going in any direction they shouldn't be when you're doing this. This is looking really good. I'm really happy with all these points are coming together. Even if they were off just a little bit, there's a whole lot going on in this quilt. So it's not really gonna be super obvious, but if it is bothering you, just pick the seams about 1/2 inch to 1 inch on either side, readjust and just sew that little bit. There's no need to unpick your entire row to do that. Just work on the ones that you're a little unhappy with, and then you'll be good to go. I am good with everything that I'm seeing here. I did press it again from the front side as well. I'm going to keep sewing, get my whole quilt top together, and we'll be sure to share photos of the finished quilt here so you can take a look and see it. Thank you so much for following along. Make sure you sign up for Stashing with Stephanie. Subscribe to our videos. Whenever you see something that you like and you want to give it a go, when you can get the supplies from us, helps us be able to continue bringing you great new patterns and new video tutorials every week. Thanks so much for following along. Until next week, happy quilting.